Thank you very much, Merritt. And I have a lot of thank yous to say to people in this institution, to Merritt and her predecessors as dean, to my colleagues on the faculty, especially those who read parts of the book and helped me improve it, to my students, especially those who listened to me as I worked on it and thought about what I wanted to say. I'm grateful to all of them. In this book, I try to get my arms around American foreign policy since the start of the Cold War in 1947. Now, this is a big and not exactly unexamined topic. So I thought I might just say a couple of words about why I undertook it. Right now, we are at one of those moments of American foreign policy debate that George Kennan described as like a stone thrown into a beehive. That is, with intense buzzing about what needs to be done, with heightened controversy and awareness of the stakes of foreign policy, lots of finger-pointing and confusion. And as Kennan said, nobody understands what's going on. To my mind, although at moments like this, there's often a great deal of reaching back for historical analogies and precedents, in reality, our past has become very remote from us. The history of American foreign policy, because we idealize it. We think of it as a period in which, over decades, since World War II, the United States led a successful and unified alliance, enjoyed domestic consensus, pursued similar policies from one decade to a next, enjoying sort of unimaginable success. Our presidents are kind of discouraged to look back on this golden age. It seems so great. But to my mind, the past is actually relevant to the present because it was chaotic and confused and full of discord. Our alliances were regularly in crisis. The American domestic scene was full of intense recrimination and scapegoating about who was at fault for this or that calamity. Our policies have changed from administration to administration. Truman thought that Roosevelt was on the wrong track. Eisenhower thought Truman was on the wrong track. Kennedy thought Eisenhower was on the wrong track. Ronald Reagan thought the last three presidents before him had been losing the Cold War, and this pattern has continued. To me, that makes the past much more like the present. We're able to see our controversies about Syria and Ukraine in a more meaningful historical context if we understand what a mess the past was. I should say that I wanted to make this argument with as much vividness as I could in the book, with color and drama and lively stories. I've assured an audience last week in California there was plenty of presidential profanity in the book. And a woman came up to me afterwards and said, "It was that presidential profanity line that made me want to buy this." So there are many different tastes. I felt in the course of writing it that perhaps I'd gone too far when my editor called me up and said, "Why is the Prime Minister of Great Britain always bursting into tears on the phone with the President?" And he claimed this had happened 6 times. And it wasn't that he was objecting, he just thought there needed to be more explanation for all these tears. We established that really it was only twice that this was the Prime Minister of Great Britain. In 4 other occasions, it was an official, high leader of some other country. There are always hard feelings toward allies in American policymaking. I like to quote John Connolly as the for the classic description of American attitudes toward working with allies. He said in a congressional hearing, "Gentlemen, the foreigners are trying to screw us, and I intend to screw them first." So, if the past is plenty messy to hold bear some similarity to our own times, is it just, as somebody once said of history, one damn thing after another? Well, I try not to tell the story that way. I try to impose some order on it. And it's as follows. So I'll give you the framework and then say a little bit by way of explanation, and then we can talk about it. Over a 70-year span, almost, since the end of World War II, it seems to me that American foreign policy has operated in two modes, what I call maximalism and retrenchment. And that it seems to me they're very relevant still to understanding what makes American foreign policy tick today and what the ingredients of success and failure have been. Maximalism and retrenchment. Each one is adopted when the previous policy is seen not to be working. One mode, maximalism, is essentially a policy based on some very sophisticated principles. Do more, think big, pedal to the metal, get moving. This maximalism is adopted after what is seen as a period of undercommitment. The other mode is retrenchment. Retrenchment is based on the opposite principles. Do less, think harder, put on the brakes, slow down. It is a policy that emerges as a result of overcommitment. Maximalism was the response of American presidents to the big Cold War crises, to the impoverishment and weakness of Western Europe and its vulnerability in the 1940s, to a series of pressures and challenges in the course of the Cold War. But we also see it in the ambitious policies that have followed the Cold War. The first President Bush toward German reunification, responding to the invasion of Kuwait, the policies of the Clinton administration in the Balkans, and then, of course, most ambitiously of all, the response of the second Bush administration to September 11th. In all of these, the president has wanted a big package of measures, was dissatisfied with the way events were trending, wanted to shake up the status quo, and commit new resources, his own prestige and political capital. It is a moment like that occasioned Kennan's description of the stone in the beehive. It produces a frenzied policy debate and often maximalist policies. Not always, and I'll hope we can come back to that. Retrenchment is what follows the maximalist policy party. After the maximalist policy party comes the retrenchment policy hangover. Retrenchment is the downsizing that followed the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Cold War, briefly, and then the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. It is a time when foreign policy shrinks in its aspirations, shrinks in the resources available. The armed forces are curtailed, the foreign assistance is cut back. There are new principles of American foreign policy identified. It is such a crude oversimplification that I didn't even put it in the book, but I will tell you that as a very rough kind of rule of thumb, the 40s, 60s, 80s, and 2000s are maximalist decades. The 50s, 70s, 90s, and 20-teens are retrenchment decades. It's so neat, I thought people would say, how vulgar and crude if you put this in the book, so I didn't do it.